Another week, another pretty bad loss for Prince Harry. You know, I never thought I could dislike Harry more, but after reading the judgment, so I read the full judgment, not the press release, which, by the way, was not exactly a smooth read because almost every other line was redacted. But I digress, it's understandable why. My point is, Prince Harry is a spoiled brat. And not that I didn't know that before, but my God, did this case confirm that. So as you all may have already heard, Prince Harry has lost his bid for judicial review in relation to Ravek's decision to not grant him 24/7 round-the-clock armed security. Now, of course, Harry and Meghan would have us all believe, based on what we've been told on the Oprah interview, that they have been entirely stripped of security and left to fend for themselves like the rest of us peasants. But as we've been saying for the last couple of years, that's a lie, because they do have security as confirmed by this case, but it just happens to be, rather than a 24/7 guarantee, a bespoke, as they termed it, tailor-made custom package for Harry, his wife, and their children. Because let's face it, their situation is not the norm. I believe I even read somewhere in the judgment that Ravek even said there's basically not a single member of the British royal family who resides overseas, at least not a member who is protected by Ravek, because guess what? Ravek's jurisdiction is within the United Kingdom, not overseas in New York, where Meghan and Harry, they actually referenced the New York catastrophic car chase that never was, but we'll get to that. Where? So it's important to point out that the point of a judicial review is not to substitute the decision that was made by the relevant government department. It's to review whether they made the decision in the correct manner, whether they made it reasonably and followed the law, the policies, the regulations that apply in that decision process. Was it fair? Was it done correctly, basically? Were material things overlooked, etc., etc. Now, Prince Harry argued that this decision was not made reasonably. It was unfair for them to make this decision without consulting me directly and involving me very heavily, and they didn't consider material facts that they should have considered before deciding to create this tailor-made bespoke security package for him and his wife. Now, the judgment confirms what the government and we have all been saying for the past 3 years, I believe, which is that Harry has always been protected by Ravek to one extent or another, or rather by the Home Office, by Metropolitan Police, whenever he visited the United Kingdom after Megxit. So he's going around talking like he's in danger in the UK. Of all places, by the way, the UK is the one place where his children can't set foot in it without 24/7 armed security. California, all good. They go to Jamaica, they're fine. So funny that. But what was clear to me as I read the judgment was that from the very beginning, and we have hints of this from their Sussex Royal website, when they basically put up, without the palace or the Queen's consent, that they are internationally protected people and that their security detail would not change, which was a lie, and they were forced to take that down basically. But they've put that up, and the same attitude was reflected by a letter that Harry wrote in, I believe, February of 2020, where they basically said the same thing. Just because we've changed our position and our roles doesn't mean our risk has changed, and we are entitled, we have a right to this taxpayer-funded armed security. And as I was saying, what's clear to me based on all of this is that they really didn't think things through before going ahead with Megxit, which is very interesting considering Meghan is such an intellectual, such an academic. Remember what she said about her new podcast with Lemonada, that she's too smart, basically, to just exist within the entertainment realm? Yeah, well, I would have thought smart people would have thought these things through, especially when you consider your children and the safety of their lives and all that, but I guess not. Another thing that was very clear to me, and I'm sure it was clear to the judge because I read his judgment after all, you know, his words, was that no matter what, Ravek, the police, the royal family, the palace, no matter what they did to accommodate Meghan and Harry, nothing was ever good enough. They're literally the most difficult, self-indulgent people who solely exist to make everyone else's lives a nightmare that I've ever heard of, at least in the celebrity realm. Because yes, I do know at least a couple of those people in real life as well, but that's besides the point. As I said earlier, every time Harry visited, if he visited with his wife, you know, back in September 2022, if he visited alone for the coronation, for the Well Child Awards, for everything that he's been known to go to the UK for his court cases, and also most recently, if you remember, when he visited the king on such short notice, he was always provided with security for these occasions, even though he time and time again didn't give them the 28-day notice that they requested. Now, my understanding from the judgment is that this was particularly an important prerequisite to Ravek after the Well Child Awards of 2021, where Harry says, "Oh, I was followed by paparazzi and I was unsafe, and you know, my mom, what happened to my mom is gonna happen to me," all that paranoia, which I'm saying is paranoia because we saw footage time and time again, and I'm sure you've seen it. The clip of him driving away from the Well Child Awards completely alone. You could almost hear crickets. So I don't know what incident he's referring to because we've never seen any evidence of it. And we know the Sussexes, they would have produced evidence if they had it by now. Why else do you think Harry was filming the catastrophic New York car chase that never was? So despite not giving them sufficient notice, they still protected him and he still complained. And when I say he complained, it's pretty much almost every time that Harry would inform Ravek of his intentions to arrive in the UK, and they would then send him or his lawyers or whomever their planned security for them, and they would almost always, through their lawyers, respond and say, "Not good enough." Now the good news is that Ravek's like, "Yeah, tough. We believe it's good enough," and guess what? No harm has ever come to Meghan and Harry in any of their visits to the UK after Megxit. And that's because Ravek are, would you know it, professionals. I mean, these are all comprised of people who specialize in security and intelligence. It's literally their job. And Harry and Meghan actually behave as though they know better. Who else would receive a security detail and look at it and go, "Not good enough"? On what basis did you make that assessment? Are you a professional in security and we didn't know about it? Then why do you need Ravek? You're all sorted. Get this, Harry had the audacity to complain about having to take the train to Manchester because he felt that he would be at risk being around members of the public in the UK. Don't believe me? Here it is for you, clear as day on the screen. This is what I mean when you say just when you think you couldn't dislike him anymore. And he pulls bull like that. But the audaciousness doesn't stop there. He literally referenced the fact that Al-Qaeda had called for his death, presumably because of his own comments over the killing of 25 Taliban in his book Spare, which all of us thought was a horrible, ridiculous, inappropriate thing to say in a book of all places, which is funny because we all said, could he really be that dumb? Was he really that desperate to boast? Or was it done perhaps on purpose to use in his security case in the future, which he ended up doing? You know what else we said was potentially, I can't prove this, constructed, designed on purpose to use for a future security case? The New York catastrophic car chase. Now, as far as we have all been aware for almost the past year now, coming on to May, it'll be a year, there was no catastrophic New York car chase. And I still stand by that. There was no catastrophic car chase. The mayor confirmed that there wasn't. The NYPD themselves confirmed that there wasn't. But as of December last year, there's been a little update that the rest of us haven't exactly been privy to. It turns out that the chief of intelligence in the NYPD wrote in a letter that he was aware of certain changes to the security posture that will be afforded to the Duke and Duchess of Sussex in light of the security incident that took place on May 16, 2023 in New York City. The letter says a thorough review of the incident had taken place, and although no formal charges were brought against the parties involved at the time, we did conclude that the behavior in question was reckless. The investigation had found reckless disregard of vehicle and traffic laws and persistently dangerous and unacceptable behavior on the part of the paparazzi during the night in question. The conclusion was that there was sufficient evidence to arrest 2 individuals for reckless endangerment. Now, this is very interesting to me because you'd think if this was truly the case, now I'm not saying the chief intelligence officer, whoever is lying or was bribed or something, but if it were the case, why wouldn't the mayor have said something like that? That 2 people were subsequently arrested, and yes, there was evidence of reckless driving. Why didn't the police come out and say something earlier as well? Why didn't the taxi driver, who we all remember, he became some sort of an overnight celebrity, attest to this? That taxi driver to me seemed a very credible witness, and he had no reason to lie. And isn't it funny how he just disappeared once he came out and said the truth? He was just gone. He canceled interviews and he just disappeared off the face of the public realm. Why? Did he receive a threat? You know, Meghan and Harry, to regular folk who don't know about them, they're scary. They're members of the royal family. And we know that they're not beneath threatening and bullying based on allegations that have been made by their own ex-employees. So all I'm saying is they may have pulled the "do you know who I am" card with the NYPD, and I know people like Meghan. They will go on and on and on and harass the life out of you until you do their bidding. And I'm not saying that this is what happened, but it just seems oddly fortuitous. It's just, whoa, all of a sudden now, yes, there was some sort of a dangerous car chase, and yes, people were arrested? Really? Now let's play devil's advocate and say that I completely agree with and believe in this new version of events. Guess what? Joke's on Meghan and Harry, because this incident doesn't fall under Ravek's jurisdiction. Because Ravek argued, and the judge agreed, that when it comes to instances like this with the Well Child Awards of 2021, assuming that Harry's allegations are true and he was chased by paparazzi, the New York car chase that never was, all of these things involving the paparazzi and just overzealous photographers and fans and whatnot isn't covered by Ravek. Number one, because in New York, obviously that's beyond Ravek's jurisdiction. But number two, Ravek is concerned primarily with providing security against people with a hostile intention. So protecting members of the royal family, for instance, against people who have an intention to harm them. It doesn't cover recklessness, because recklessness is basically you're careless, you don't care. But you never intended to do any harm. They just wanted to get a story, a scoop, so that they can make money, sell to media outlets. And the judge agreed. So, yeah, so much for filming that catastrophic car chase. And since we have this picture up, here's a reminder of just how spooked Meghan Markle was during this whole ordeal. She looked pleased as punch from where I'm sitting. Now, here's the most important factor. Just because Harry may disagree with the decision to give him a tailored, bespoke security detail that is considered on a case-by-case basis, that doesn't make the decision wrong, which is basically the gist of his argument. I don't like this decision, so fix it, because he's an entitled, privileged, spoiled brat. When it comes to material considerations that Harry said were not considered, for example, the fact that the UK's reputation will be impacted if something were to happen to him or his family. That's something the decision maker didn't consider, and therefore his decision was wrong. By law, the decision maker in this instance had absolute discretion in deciding what a material consideration was. So there were no guidelines, no policies that dictated to the decision maker that he must or they must consider these things. So Sir Richard Mottram, who was the decision maker in this instance, was free to decide what was material and what was immaterial. So that argument falls flat on its face purely based on this. When it comes to issues of transparency and not really involving Harry very much, well, as the judge put it, Ravek is an intelligence agency effectively, right? They monitor intelligence, they get access to highly classified information. And so by their very nature, they're not exactly expected to be very transparent in their dealings. They're not in the habit of sharing highly classified information with other individuals. The procedural fairness argument he brought up, where, he wasn't treated fairly because he wasn't involved, also falls flat on its face because his private secretary was pretty much present at the meetings that were held involving Ravek and discussions of Harry and Meghan's security. And so to argue that they were completely in the dark and they didn't have a representative sitting in on these meetings and taking part actively in these decision-making processes was absolutely false. Even though Harry threw his own employee under the bus, I don't believe she works for them anymore, but he basically said that his private secretary at the time was barely in the role for 6 months and therefore didn't know anything. So he thinks that he, being Prince Harry, who barely, he failed school, got D's at best, and, he's not the brightest tool in the shed, as we all know, but he was somehow more qualified than his private secretary, who the judge found to be quite adequate and, very good at her job and competent. And at the end of the day, the judge plays devil's advocate and says, you know what? Let's say that Harry was directly involved. He was allowed to sit in on the meetings or submit written submissions and recommendations and, tell them exactly what he expected. The decision maker has stated in his witness statement that he would not have changed the outcome. He wouldn't have changed his decision, even had he considered all of Harry's requests, including his request to apparently pay for this security, which in paragraph 28 of this judgment, by the way, it states that the royal household offered to pay for Meghan and Harry's security, not Harry himself. So I don't know if that's just something we'd never heard of before, that happened before Harry made the offer, or Harry lied. I mean, considering his track record along with his wife, I wouldn't be surprised if it was the latter. But after all this, it was refused. So his bid for judicial review was rejected. Now he has, of course, being Prince Harry, announced that he would be appealing. And that really got on my nerves. It really did. As a member of the legal profession, I know how strained things can be. I know how limited resources are. I know how there are real cases that deserve more time and attention and resources. Cases involving life and death instead of some spoiled brat prince who has way more money than he knows what to do with, taking up all of the court's time, taking up taxpayer money. Apparently this case alone has cost British taxpayers almost £500,000, so almost £500,000 wasted. And guess what? If this appeal's allowed, it's not going to stop there. Now, Harry doesn't have an automatic right to appeal. He must request permission to appeal to the Court of Appeal. And he has, according to the civil procedure rules, Rule 52.8, 7 days to make this application to appeal. As to whether permission to appeal would be granted at all, I really don't think so. I would be really surprised if it is granted, because when it comes to appeals, it is so much more strict than when a trial judge or the original decision maker makes a decision. You really have to jump through some serious hurdles to get an appeal. So for instance, there has to be an error of law rather than an error of fact. So you can't attack the judge's fact-finding process, but rather how he applied the law, or I suppose the claimant would be arguing how the judge misapplied the law. And based on my reading of this judgment, as much as everything was redacted, I don't see how the judge made any error of law. I don't see how Ravek made any error in their decision-making process, which, as I said, was quite thorough. Now, officially, there is a legal test in the civil procedure rules that determines when an appeal should be allowed. And this includes when the court considers that the appeal would have a real prospect of success, or there is some other compelling reason for the appeal to be heard. Now, compelling reasons could include new or fresh evidence that the claimant wasn't aware of, wasn't in possession of, despite their best efforts, or simply didn't exist until now. But as far as I'm aware, no such evidence exists. So I can't possibly think of anything else that they may have to sway the Court of Appeal's mind and shoot this back to Ravek. Now, since we're on that topic, let's say the appeal goes through, the court still wouldn't be able to replace Ravek's decision. The best that a court can do is send it back to the department that is in question, the defendant, and ask them to basically go through the decision-making process once again, which means that Ravek will then probably go through the same steps and come back with the same decision, because that's exactly what they said. They said, if we were to reconsider all of these arguments, we would still make the same decision. So there you go. Prince Harry is, he's been an official vexatious litigant for a while now, but this really, really is the cherry on top, isn't it? And I seriously think his lawyers should put their foot down at this point and at least try to convince him, because at the end of the day, if he wants to go ahead with it, they would have to go ahead with it as well. But they can still, even formally, in a letter of advice, inform him that you have very poor prospects of success, and we highly advise against this. However, if you want to go ahead with it, so be it. And for someone as thick-headed as Harry and Meghan, because when I'm reading through this judgment and Harry's just desperation, his insistence on getting this security, I just can't help but feel that Meghan Markle is fueling this, because there's just this level of stubbornness and this level of how can you not involve me that to me has Meghan Markle's fingerprints all over it. I mean, remember how she wasn't invited to the Sandringham summit and she made such a big fuss about it? How could they, how dare they hold this meeting with you, Harry, and not with me? They did this on purpose, yada yada yada. How dare they not want me there at the Queen's deathbed, even though the Queen probably didn't want her there herself? I mean, who cares what the Queen thinks, right? The late Queen, may she rest in peace. It's all about Meghan. Well, I think it's about time that someone showed them that, no, it's not all about you. You're just a tiny, little, insignificant human being, just like the rest of us. And sometimes, like the rest of us, you're going to be told no. And you're just going to have to sit there and accept it, because you can't possibly always be in the right. But try saying that to Meghan and Harry. And that's it. Hope you all have a good day, a good week, a good weekend, whatever it is. And I'll see you in the next one.